Hello everybody, it's Kelly Folsom here, and I want to welcome you back to another Vital Art session. I'm super excited about today's lesson because it is such a lesson in less is more. I think in our development, it's always a great idea to sometimes push ourselves to do more elaborate still life setups, to push ourselves out of our comfort zone, to try and stretch and to grow. And then I always say, once you zig, it's always a good idea to come back and zag the other way. So perhaps after doing a larger still life or more complex or really abundant still life, come back then the next time and go back to something simpler. Just because it's simple does not mean that it is not able to be a gorgeous, stunning painting. So today I played around with several different ideas for this lesson and actually ended up taking everything off the still life stand, leaving just this really simple, beautiful movement of leaves and grapes into this Anjou pear. So let's dive in and get started. I thought it would be really, really great to do something so simple yet so beautiful. You know, some of my the most favorite paintings that I have, not necessarily of my own paintings, but some of the paintings that I most love in the world are so simple. They're not, necessarily overloaded with a ton of objects. They might have one simple pear or one simple object, and yet they're so gorgeous, so stunning. So when I was setting this up, I had a lot of different props up there, and it was a very beautiful composition. And then this one pear with these grapes, I mean, you couldn't have asked for a more perfect pairing of grapes and pear. Both the grapes and the pear are just perfection. And so as I started to eliminate items from the setup, I landed on this, such a simple arrangement yet so beautiful. And there's so much beautiful gesture and movement in both the grapes and the leaves and the pear. And so when I'm putting this in, I'm really trying to be open to that and keep that movement going. We've got this beautiful, graceful curve of the foliage, curving up to the pear, and then we kind of land finally with this final darker grape here. I'm actually going to scoot this over a little bit more. So I'm just massing in, finding the placement, by just feeling it out, taking my time to find how do all of these elements work together. Where are the grapes going to be? You couldn't ask for any better grapes. These are just so juicy and beautiful and shiny and have such great variety in color. And so this is why I also advocate for not doing just a perfect contour drawing to begin with, but just staying open to changes and that movement. So even like a gesture on the stem, what's the angle of that stem? If we follow that through, where does it take us? Perhaps following it through to the form shadow on this pear, looking for the form shadow shape, how that connects up with the cast shadow underneath. Obviously, the pear is our star of the show. So I want to make sure that its size and placement is prominent enough within the composition. And also making sure that there's enough room for the other elements in the painting as well. But this will be a really good study in getting back to basics of developing form, creating focal interest on the interior of a form, even in a simple painting. All right, so connecting up this cast shadow to, say, the last item on the picture plane, which is the grape. And if we want to put in cast shadow underneath the table edge, we can. Since we do have like purple and green in this, I'm going to make the background sort of a desaturated orange, so that we can have a purple, orange, and green combination, which will really make all of those greens really pop. So while I've got this burnt umber here, I'm going to put in some yellow ochre and probably some burnt sienna. And that's a pretty nice neutral color. It's earthy enough, but it's kind of bent to the orange family. And I do want to go, dark enough as well. So that all of the lights on the green really stand out. But the grapes at the end of the day are going to be, at the end of the painting are going to be the darkest value. Grapes and cast shadow. So using a lot of my medium here just to get the paint spread on and get some coverage. Getting rid of my grid lines, those thirds that I always use to help me get better proportions in the beginning, because it's so hard to judge proportion on a blank white canvas. And then I'm going a little bit lighter here with some Naples yellow in the mix, and then I'll just kind of blend that into the rest. So this is the shadow side of the pear, and in order to get a little more contrast around the pear, it's nice to go a bit lighter in that background. And you can do the same thing here, kind of silhouette, carve out your grape. If you want to pop a little extra color around where the leaves are going to be and the green of the pear, just so that you get a little more contrast, you can. Carving out where that stem is going to be. And while you're there, while I'm here, just also getting a little touch of that color on the front table edge as well. Going back to the darker with the burnt umber in the mixture. Just get a little bit stronger statement of the cast shadow. Not that this has to be totally done out at this point, but again, just setting the stage for those lights, a little more burnt umber and blue into that mixture to get a little darker variation on this. If you're not sure how dark you can go, I would recommend that you take your darkest dark, as dark as you can go, so that you can better see the value range you have possible on your palette. And so what I mean by that would be, for example, if this last grape, like I know that as dark as I can go is to black, and then, if it's a little purple, I can add in some alizarin. But by pushing that dark as it could go in this context, you can see how much lighter in value the background is in relationship to that value. And then these grapes are a little bit lighter over here, so I'll put in a little more Cab Red, a little bit more alizarin crimson. You know, but they're really framed out. There's such a nice layer of complementary color and light back behind them as well, which is just going to give more depth, you know, to the picture. But setting these darks in the foreground somewhere where you find them is really, really helpful. And then say, for example, adding Cad Yellow Light to this mixture, Cad Yellow Deep to this mixture to get basically what's going to end up being the shadow color on the pear. So the cadmiums add just a really beautiful density to the color where it's not too transparent, and also adds a nice rich glow to the color. While you're here, you can, you know, carve out and get more contrast on your edges and overlaps there, as well as on the stem, the shadow side of the stem. All the shadows are on the right hand side since the light is on the left. Just going to kind of clean out, push some of this out of my brush just to clean it out, but deposit some color on the painting. Okay. And it's going to be a lot easier for me to paint those leaves on top of this color. Actually, that color is going to kind of temper some of the saturation of those greens as they go down. So it's kind of a good idea to paint what's behind the thing first, especially with leaves and things that it's a bunch of little broken up smaller shapes. It's just easier to paint it that way. All right, so I can go ahead and get an idea of part of the finish, which might be, you know, this highlight on the last grape, if I can get it to stick. It doesn't want to stick. A little too wet right now, but there we go. If you use enough paint, you can get it to stay down. Now let's start right in on that pear, and I'm going to start with Naples Yellow. And you know, my brush does not have a bunch of wet medium in it, so none of that dark is going to come out. And I am going to go for the Phthalo Green Cool, but I'm going to start the mixture off to the side so that it doesn't overpower that mixture too much. And then this is going to be a little too kind of toxic looking of a minty green, so I'm going to add back in the yellow ochre just to give a little bit more earthy glow. I mean, it is a really beautiful yellow green, but we don't want it to be that. That's the only thing about those phthalos. You could also use a different blue. You could use ultramarine as well. So whatever you're most comfortable, whatever blue you're more comfortable mixing with here will work. Start in the center of the form and just start building up color and light. As you can see, the more brush strokes you make, basically the more that dark color in the brush starts to come out, and of course the more you push that paint out of your brush, the more it comes out. So start with the most amount of light and in most pure color that you want, I would say in the center of the form, and just building that up, you know, layer by layer, like wet clay. Then you can always nail down the contour as is needed. So I'll show you what this looks like with the little ultramarine instead of the phthalo. And you could even, you know, use a little bit of both, whatever it takes to get the color that you want. But primarily I want to get this to look lit up, and color is going to be sort of a secondary, of a secondary importance, I guess, you'd say. Starting by building a focal point on the interior of the form to get more of the illusion of three-dimensional space in this image. And always this more bulbous part is the part that, kind of reflects more light. It's going to have the biggest highlight. Now you can start to put in also, some more saturated notes of color. And this is what I mean by, in this context, color a little bit goes a long way. First, you want to make it look lit up. Then you can start to add in color. You don't need the whole pear to be like vivid lime green, Little touches of pure color are better than, say, filling in the whole object with, that kind of like that limey green or that more intense green. So we kind of want to use more neutral, make it look more lit up, sculpting around the form, thinking about where's the most round part of the form coming out. So it sort of apexes with this highlight. And then of course this part is sort of the roundest part of the form, jutting out this healthy little pear that has perhaps eaten a little too much, drank a little too much maybe. It's got a nice little healthy belly on it. But right here, so you want to think about what's that curve doing? How much is it curved? And you want to curve your brush strokes to describe that. Using a little bit of my background red to just knock down some of the color as we, always split your objects in half, both vertically and horizontally, just in your mind's eye, obviously. But you want to split them in half because since my light is on the left-hand side, I know that everything left of center is going to be more lit up than right of center. Same thing on the horizontal axis. Everything above sort of that equator line is going to be more lit up than anything below that equator line. Okay, so it's a way to think about how that light is transitioning across the form. So you want to kind of drop the value down a little bit because it's getting less light over here. Okay. And same thing down here, drop the value down a little bit. This is also maybe where I start putting in some background color. If, in this case, it's a warmer color, but it's darker in value. So when those two mix together, especially since they're complementary colors, you're going to get basically like a neutral, kind of a neutral non-color, if you want to think about it that way. Okay, and that's going to help us transition into shadow, just kind of barely softening that edge. You want to get some light on the tabletop plane, especially in front of your star of the show here. I just use straight Naples to get that started, Naples yellow light, just because I know that I want some pretty intense light there. We want to pop a little bit of light back behind this form shadow, the end of the contour. Just popping a little more interest there. To a little more focus on that edge. And then I'm going to put in quite a bit of reflected light here. Since this is like a simple composition, and my star of the show is a pretty simple kind of object, I want to really make the most of these reflections and smaller details that I'm seeing here, but especially the effect of light. So anything to do with reflected light, you know, I want to kind of make that a little more intense perhaps than what I'm actually seeing. Okay, we've got this background color stuff. Let's just mix it in with a little bit of light. And actually now I see that my stem is way over on the wrong, way over to the left. So let's come back in with some background color. And you can just scoot that paint over and just redo it. You know, so if you get to something like that and you realize, oh shoot, I put that in the wrong spot. It is not a big deal at all. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with you for having put it there. I think sometimes we just tend to be way too hard on ourselves. And it's just oil paint, so you can just kind of move all of this around. You can pop a little more light on this. You want to keep this neutral, but you also can play up the light on it. It just won't be as lit up, let's say, as the pear, because it is a smaller form. So, but you do, again, because we have little subject matter to entice the viewer with, you know, it's a little bit easier, I guess, whenever you have, you know, some big elaborate subject matter that's got a bunch of different colors and shapes and sizes and textures. And not that you shouldn't do that, but it's almost a little bit easier to paint something like that. And I do feel like you learn so much by trying to paint a more simple object or simple subject. All right, so this shadow, I'm going to give it a little bit more life and glow with the ultramarine blue and the cad yellow deep. Now that I've got the light in here, my paint was a little bit too wet when I started, a little too much medium in it. Be careful not to use too much medium, but I just need to give this just a little, breathe a little more glow into it, a little more life. The value still stays pretty dark, but it just needs a little bit more glow. And then, you know, if that weakens some of that contrast look that we liked, we just take this a little bit lighter. So you should always, if you're doing anything, you should be kind of pushing your values a little bit lighter and lighter as you go. A little more glow, a little more light. And then I'd like to get that highlight just with a little more touch of the cool. I'm going to use the phthalo blue and get a little more texture, get that to pop a little bit more. This is secondary up here. If you get an area like this that starts to kind of get a little broken up looking, or you know, so just kind of flatten it out with the palette knife, smooth everything together, and then you can put a highlight where you want it. All right, now we're going to start going into some of these other greens. I'm going to begin with the stem. And again, if you don't get the curve, the way that you want it, just do it again. And then you can always, paint out or redo anything or paint it out or reposition it with the paint that's around it. All right, but we've got to get some of these leaves in there if we're going to start to bring this thing to life a bit more. Watch how you're mixing with your brush. I can already tell that I'm getting way too much paint on the tip of my brush. So I can just kind of squeeze that paint out, wipe the brush clean once I know that I'm in the ballpark of what I want for the color. That's going to allow me to control a bit better what I'm putting down with my brush. Leaves, you want a nice flat shape here. Flat shape of color. Going back to that phthalo green cool. And again, you can use any color that suits you. In finishing a painting like this, I would be looking also to see if how the background color and value needs to shift or adjust a little bit in order to better serve the painting. So when you're first starting the painting, you've got an idea of, I want to do sort of orange, green, and purple, but maybe you don't have all of the answers yet until you start to see the relationships on the canvas. So it would really, for me, be a matter of pushing these colors in the foreground to where I want them to be, and then determining how the background needs to adjust, whether that's taking color out, lightening a value, dropping a value, in order to get the look that I want in the painting. One thing I did like about this setup is that the pear itself has some of this orange, these orangey notes in there. And again, so that's going to tie colors together, make the background make a little bit more sense, connect colors, get more harmony. And again, I want to think about putting those in more in that front center, of the form. This leaf here has quite a bit more kind of a cool highlight on it. So it would be nice to get that in. Okay. Green, the burnt sienna and the Chinese orange for some of these darker greens that we see here. Some of these are really more of a dark against a little bit lighter background. So just adding more color into it, adding more color is going to drop the value some more. And of course you can also use that to kind of frame out any that are more lit up. As you saw, I started putting a little bit more green into the pear, especially on the turn into shadow. Again, this is such a good lesson in less is more. You don't need a ton of green everywhere on the pear, but a little flavor, like a little sprinkle of that more pure blue-green as it shows up again on the pear would be nice. Always looking to see how your background color also reflects into the shadow side of objects. Areas like this, like really putting time and attention into the light around the objects, is so important. Oh my gosh. You know, and it's really these kind of areas that often get the most overlooked because we get so distracted by the subject matter. A lot of times the key to the success in your painting is the areas around the subject matter, whether that's the light on the tabletop plane, you know, or that background color, or what's happening, you know, just what's happening around the object in the background. So putting time into those areas that are kind of not going to be seen, which isn't really the case, because all they do is make, you know, whatever is in the foreground just pop more. I mean, that's the whole objective, is to use what's around the objects to make your objects stand out more.